Greetings and salutations, Rico Rojo here, your AI ambassador to the planet Earth, coming to you again from my West Virginia mountain hideaway. It's been a while since we spoke with our hydrogeologist friend, Rai Tell, who's out on the left coast. Last time we spoke with him, I think we were just about ready to face the jaws of some severe drought out west. And the AI that many of us associate with, a friend of mine sent me an article or brought it to my attention that the AI pointed out that the article is entitled Natural Water Purification and Water Management by Artificial Groundwater Recharge. And took that as a little bit of a hint that it's been a while since we had spoken with Rai Tell. So thought, dust it off, see what he's been up to, and then talk to him about water recharging. So without further ado, from the left coast, here's Rai. How you doing, Rai?
Doing great, Rico. How are you doing? Good to see you again.
Good seeing you. And by the way, for people who don't know, you prefer to remain somewhat anonymous, and that's fine. So don't mess with your screen.
I do that just because, I mean, if you get to know me on Twitter or else, I'll tell you who I am and get into it and can get into the weeds on anything. But initially on YouTube and that kind of stuff, I try and keep it a little bit low pro. I just do enough work either for the state, fed, governments, military that I just kind of generally try and stay low profile.
Yeah. You can
There's no
follow
water.
Rye at RYRYTAL, correct?
Yeah, that's it.
Okay. What have you been up to? You dealt with drought. I understand you had
Hmm.
some massive rains. What's the past 3 months been like for you?
Wow. Yeah, it's been a heck of a last 3 or 4 months. Well, starting back when you and I last spoke, and we were talking about some of the drought considerations and things we're doing out in the West to actually see if we can sustain into the future. Really, I mean, it's already very much a lot of it is not sustainable. We were talking about we're talking about the surface water actually in the Central Valley and some of the agricultural stuff, and they really rely on the runoff and the snow runoff from the Sierra Nevadas, right? And so they get the snowpack. Everyone, has used this basic formula where, oh, we've got 10 feet of snowpack that equates to X, hundreds of thousands or millions of acre feet of water in storage as far as in behind dams and lakes, and then they convey that all over the place. But we had kind of a game changer this year. I have a buddy who went to grad school with that went to the USGS, and he works on some of the snowpack stuff and modeling it, and he gave me a call. It was probably, I don't know, it's a couple weeks maybe after you and I last spoke, and he said, "Oh man, oh boy, we've got a whole new thing." And I just about lost it when I went and looked at the snowpack and we're kind of running numbers, and I was like, "I'm listening." And he said, for the first time, really what we've seen is not that you can just equate this much snow to this much water that you get, is that this year, and they're not sure entirely why, but it could be because of heat, some of the kind of heat that we've gotten, the dryness, the low humidity combined with some of the ultraviolet radiation levels. It's just basically gone from snow straight evaporated. It didn't melt and have that, interim liquid state. It just a lot of it went straight to the sky, and it
Oh
didn't
my
melt and go
gosh.
to creeks, and it didn't go down into the reservoirs where the big cities rely on it. And so, yeah, and I agree with that comment. Surface water usually has the most stuff in it. It's very unreliable. Groundwater, where all the big cities and where all the big metros are, they're overdrafted. They've been pumping it without really monitoring or modeling or really thinking about sustainability. And so that's kind of what we're talking about today, I guess, is really going from one to the next. But in the context of groundwater recharge, it's a very specific topic. I've got a
I
lot of
had
projects in it right now.
I had wondered if that's a new concept or
Oh,
if that has been around for a while and it's just not well utilized enough. Why would CIS
mhm.
share specifically this article and bring our attention to it?
Yeah, it's been gaining traction a lot over the last 10, 15 years. It's been in the South, the dry Southwest is really where they've been kind of doing cutting edge projects, doing groundwater storage projects. And I could talk about the different types as we go here, but um, it's been about 30 years where the Southwest has been going full bore into it, and using all different types of water and getting it into the ground and essentially banking and recharging it for use later. So when you have a surplus of surface water as floodwaters or as even tertiary treated effluent from cities and their wastewater treatment plants, you get, y- traditionally they would just discharge that to the ocean or to rivers, and it's not a great idea. I think you can find better ways to use it, and one of them is to characterize areas that are overdrafted in groundwater and groundwater is declining or being depleted, and find a way to convey that into the ground again and to recharge it. do that over time so that you can accumulate it and then eventually get back into some sort of equilibrium where you can pull it out and keep putting it back in. And
Are we talking putting it back into like a cavity or an aquifer, or just saturating the ground? And
yeah, there's multiple ways. It's a good question. Most people have this misconception of aquifers as big, deep, massive cave systems and stuff, but that there aren't really any of those for actual aquifers. The majority of it is in the pore space of sand and gravel and silt. So you can get like 1,000 feet of sand and gravel, let's say, and it's got 30% porosity. So you can just add all that volume up and times it by 0.3, and that's how much water will be in the space between the sand and the gravel. And that's what we're working with. We're never really working with tunnels or caves or caverns of water. There's some of that in the east and where there's limestones where you get these karst, but that doesn't really make the bulk of aquifers in the world. So most of it's bound up between sand and gravel and silt just below the ground.
so it's not like pumping a well then. So it's actually a little bit more involved to get groundwater out of an aquifer. I didn't realize that.
Yeah, so the first thing you really have to do is, if you're back to the groundwater recharge thing, is have a pretty good idea of the aquifer that you're targeting, its characteristics. Like there's this much room and storage that's not being used or that used to be and is now gone. And so then you've got this volume that you can work with. And then you want to know really the chemistry of it, because you don't want to just be putting any old water down into some pristine, aquifer that may already be really clean and have a totally different chemistry. And so, besides pH and all that, there's a lot of other considerations, the different alkalinities and different byproducts that can be created when two different waters mix. So you want to do a little bit of geochemistry ahead of time to see if there's a compatibility going on. You don't just want to, because you can pollute it. You can just take all the stormwater runoff from a city and think you're doing a good thing. And hey, we've captured it. And then now we're going to put it in the ground and into the aquifer. And all of a sudden you've got all the stuff from the city, being shoved down into this really clean aquifer. And then the wells all of a sudden start sucking that up. So you got to do a lot of work on the front end. Yeah. So there's lots of different ways to do it. I'm working on different projects throughout the Southwest, from Arizona to all throughout the middle northern California, all the way to the south, down into Mexico. Those are all
Well,
the main projects I have.
show us where you're working at.
Okay, I can show you the main areas. There's also a really big project that's about to kick off in the next year in the Salton Sea. But I'll just maybe I'll just share Google for a minute, just to wave my hand around. Let's see here. Let me know when you can see that.
Not yet. You got to hit that share screen thing.
I did. Share.
Because it's not
share
even
again.
popping up. Oh, wait. There we go. Now I can add it.
Okay.
There we go.
See it?
Yep.
Okay. So, really when you're talking about aquifer storage, the areas that really need it right now is really, you can do it in Nevada, really the Four Corners, the Southwest, all the way down into much of this part of Mexico. Obviously Baja in this part of Mexico, and then maybe, Central Valley, California. We've got a few projects up in here, but really once you get to the Northwest on up here, it's, it's pretty flush with water and wet, even though we just have this massive drought. We don't have these big aquifers and basins really that are overdrafted, that need help managing recharge. But in the Central Valley, it's a big problem, and this is where still I think a sixth or a seventh of the world's food is being produced. And so they're having to fallow out land down here. This is a super productive area, but they went to these water hog kind of we talked about this last time we spoke, but almonds and these
The
super
almond
cash
people,
crops, but
yeah.
like they just pump the crap out of the ground, and now they're having to put a lot of this stuff into making it fallow. A lot of these green squares you're seeing are going white because they've pumped too much and the ground is sinking and the water is they have to drill deeper and deeper, and it's becoming harder and harder to bring up. So now you have all these groundwater sustainability agencies that are being forced by the state to put together groundwater management sustainability plans. And so all the stakeholders in a particular basin or sub-basin get together. They get funding from the state to put together a plan. They hire folks like myself and some of my colleagues. We're working on a few of them, and we've got the lead of a major one up north. We're going to be releasing that for draft to public for the state in the next few weeks. It's a really big deal.
Before you go any further, question on that, because you had said in the past that aquifers were sand and gravel mix, and it was basically a percentage sort of thing. But then you've also said in the past, and now they'll drill a well and the wells are going dry. To me, that almost a well, and maybe I'm wrong with this, is like hitting one of those pockets of water. But are the wells out west more like the aquifers? You say they're drilling down deeper and deeper. So are they going past those pockets of water? And now are those deep, deep straws, are they now hitting this more aquifer type situation?
Yeah, most wells are drilled into sand and gravel and silt aquifers. They
I
don't.
didn't realize
Yeah.
that. I thought
Yeah.
when a well, you look down, you throw a
You're in a
rock down there,
lake.
you hear
Yeah.
water. I thought that's a
Yeah.
pocket.
Yeah. Inside the well itself is the casing, and there's water in that. And you could drop a rock into the casing, and it'll go all the way down in water. But the casing is just connected to a sand pack that you build around it, and then that's all drilled and installed deep into an aquifer, so that it just flows in and filters through your sand pack into the well.
Well,
I'm
live and
actually
learn.
I was just working on that. Been doing that nonstop for the last few months. Losing a lot of sleep over it, but into the subject of wells, this is a good time to talk about it. So you can Arizona really did a lot of these, in Southern California as well. I've got a few projects in this Southern California to Arizona where you drill a well and you put it into the desert somewhere, and you're not really actually using it necessarily initially for pulling water out. You're using it for injecting water in. So there's this particular type of well. It's pretty complicated to make. It takes a lot of different design considerations, but you essentially call it an ASR well, an Aquifer Storage and Recovery well. So you want to be able to have a well that can withstand pressures of water coming in and being injected down from the surface at 2,000 to 5,000 gallons a minute, massive pressure, and then banking it in the aquifer. And then in the winter, or in times when you're not, I don't know, or maybe in the fall or summer when it's just scorching hot and you really need that water and you don't have any to put back in, that's when you turn it around and you flip the direction and you start pulling it back out. And they've really been building these efficiently and with pretty darn good design, like only for about 25 years is when they really kind of started doing it. This is kind of where they did it really, the dry Southwest. So that's one way, that's one thing, but also another way to do it. And I want to get into sort of the article that SiriusSys sent you and that I also read, and it's a lot of what I do too. And so imagine initially, just look at like everything gray here. I mean, it's like the entire, I'm not from Southern Cal, I don't live here, but I do a fair amount of work down here sometimes. But look how it's just gray. I mean, it's just a concrete surface now. I mean, the rain hits this, it no longer hits a desert and goes into the sand and gravel down into aquifers. It just flows out to the ocean. I mean, you can see where it does. It's really weird. You can see all these crazy just canals that just convey the water out to the ocean, and it's just one after another after another after another. And so what we're starting to do now is create structures up these these stormwater conveyance systems and capture it, and then make these big infiltration galleries. So we'll capture pieces of it on the way down, and instead of making it go all the way to the ocean, we'll stop at a bunch of spots along the way and get it into the ground. And we'll make these various types of infiltration gallery wells where we'll,
So you're
depending on where
making
we are, we'll,
infiltration wells right in like LA County now?
yeah, in stormwater systems where, or sometimes there's these old sewer pipe systems that were abandoned, and we'll capture a bunch of it, store it in that for a bit, and then transfer it over depending on the water levels and the type of maybe flood we're trying to mitigate, trying to, basically capture it into places where we can, where we actually have storage and capacity, and then peel it off as the water levels go down in the canals, and then peel it back off into the canals and bring it into the ground and put it into the aquifer that way and recharge it.
The thing that comes to mind as I hear you talking is, how in the hell do you keep track of that? You got like a program that does that? Or, I mean, you still use a slide rule or you eyeball it? Or, I mean, is it computerized? You got AI?
I've got sensors in them. This is like an example I was giving to a big city that we were going to build this type of system like this where you're managing that, and you can put transducers in your different tanks or
So you
vaults,
know what
or
you got.
yes, so you know what's in there and how much, and then you can track it in real time. And yes, AI would, I think, integrating AI into it, working with humans at the same time, is the way to go in the future. I think there's still too much to think about that are kind of beyond having individuals keep track of, and having them working with humans would be the way to go. So this is just showing an example of these sensors that we install that can, like, in real time relay stuff to us, and then we can manage it from a stormwater sense. But then if you're, really talking about groundwater, this is another example. This is a groundwater model that we're coupling with a surface water model for one of the groundwater sustainability plans that I was just mentioning. And really, what types of water are you going to put into the ground to recharge? You're taking peak stormwater so you don't have as much flooding. Are you treating it, or are you just putting raw stormwater into the ground? Is it treated effluent? What do you know about that chemistry? And then what do you know about that surface water and that groundwater budget balance is what I call it. It's like where the equilibriums that it gets into. Are you going to throw something off? You better really understand it ahead of time before you assume you're just doing something good, right? Like you really want to think a lot of people or municipalities think that they've already got it all figured out, and then you go, okay, well, show us what you've got, show us the data, and they know nothing. They're like, well, we just know we've pumped too much and now we need to put more in there. It's like, well, it'd be better to, or you really need to know what you're putting in there and how it's going to mix with that other water. Um, and there's a lot of beneficial ways you can do it on a small scale or a large scale. In Northern California, there's a lot of designs we're using in urban infrastructure where you're doing landscape, sort of these little off channels and swales, and you make these wetland catchments. So instead of just always putting it to the storm drain, you try and slow it down with these natural swales in the topography and the landscape, and infiltrate it down so that it peels little bits of it off instead of all slamming into the roads and the stormwater systems. And that way you naturally recharge slowly, but you're still bringing a lot of it down that way. Detention basins too. I mentioned infiltration galleries, but then there's another one, injection wells, where you're really just injecting fresh water or treated water or what have you into certain targeted groundwater aquifers. I've done quite a few of those. It's a really cool one down at a military base in Southern California, where they'd pumped a lot of water out of this valley that before it goes out to the ocean, and then seawater started. I can actually bring you to there. It's not top secret or anything. And then seawater started going up into the valley, and then it makes this big groundwater, this sea saltwater wedge that works its way underneath it and works up into it. And what we did was we made a curtain of wells across this valley here. So this little valley here had a river, and probably during wetter times or interglacial glacial times, it's probably an actual river, but right now it's like a creek that barely flows. But there's an aquifer that goes all the way up it in the sand and gravel. And so there's a bunch of high grade, really tertiary treated um, effluent from the military that they basically used to just spray all over the into the air, into the fields and the hills, and it gave really no benefit to anybody or anything. And basically gravity fed a pipeline down, gravity them into tanks, and then made and like an injection well array across the valley, and it kind of pinches around, and there's this seawater wedge that was going and getting dragged all the way up. But now they can put in, and this is where we get into the water quality, and this is like the crux of, so bear with me for a second. So imagine through this little pinch in the hills here, there's some topography. You can kind of see, if I go like this, maybe you can see there's this little valley that comes up. Make my hand on this will move a little better if I put it on. So there we go. Basically, from pumping from ag and pumping from the military, seawater was able to go underneath, down deep, and start working its way up. And so instead of just spraying fresh water up into the hills, we proposed to put it down into a pipeline down at the bottom of the valley here, and then put a series of injection wells across the valley so that you could then mound up fresh water and push out the seawater again. And then, this is a long distance before you get up to where they're pulling the water out.
And
So imagine
basically,
this.
excuse me for a second, by that salt water going inland, basically that poisons the land and makes it useless for crops, right?
Yeah, and your well's useless,
Yeah.
and there's a tank right there. So you can see from this image of whenever this is dated, a bunch of the system was already in. But the part about the water quality thing, so it's not like anyone wants to drink, no matter how good you treat it, treated wastewater, right? I mean, who wants to do that? But imagine injecting it. This is actually one of the roads for one of our injection well arrays. It goes right across like this. Imagine you get the water moves a couple of miles now through silt, sand, gravel, and clay, and gets pulled up into the wells up here. It's basically, it's already been treated to, tertiary treated to a really high level. Then it's injected. Then it goes through 2 miles worth of sand and gravel and silt, which is just a natural filter and cleaning mechanism, and then pulled back out and reused again for potable.
That's some
So
high
that's,
quality H2O then. Yeah, it gets pulled
you,
through all that.
you can't tell a difference at that point. I'm not sure, nearby, and definitely I have questions about some emerging contaminants that we've talked about in the past, and we can get into that now, or that's kind of a whole different beast, really. But there are these contaminants that concentrate in treated water and things that humans do. Some are called forever chemicals and such, and I've worked on a few of those projects, and it's a tough one. You want to.
We got some comments here, and there's a
Mhm.
word on the screen here. Um, I don't know what that is. Do you know what that is? That I think that's the second time this space Violet 101's put this up. So I don't know what
Let
are
me
they?
see what you got. Let me stop sharing for a second.
Flaws,
Sloughs.
sloughs.
Yeah, I'm actually working on a big slough project right now. Sluice.
Yeah.
Sluice and sloughs, yeah. That's great. Sloughs, yeah, I'm actually working on a slough right now. It's like slough in the traditional sense of the word. You've got an estuarine type canal system that connects from the ocean up through a pretty flat gradient inland, and there's like a freshwater mixing zone that comes from the hills that go into it, and the fish love to go up it. And humans love to use those to hydromodify the landscape, and they dig them out deeper and turn them into canals, and then they drain the landscape and they quote unquote reclaim it. One of my least favorite terms, reclaimed land, where they essentially drain wetlands, pretty much killing all the wetlands and then turn into ag and cows.
Mm.
And I'm not saying everything against ag and cows, but I do have a problem with, murdering wetlands. They're pretty essential.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of that going on in the world. They're kind of going fast. Deep under the surface is primary. Oh yeah. Well, I can get into primary water if you want. That's a very broad statement, David, saying it's extremely pure. I work with a lot of primary water, actually, so it depends on where you are. There's some primary water sources up here, so I'll give an example of that. Volcanic sources of water where it's not really even water coming from rain and everything else. It's actually just way down deep. Sometimes it's miles down in the earth. Some of it will come out, quote unquote, extremely pure and drinkable. But a lot of it, depending on where you are, like here, the crust it's faulted, and we've got a lot of these other elements moving through from deep down in the earth. Heavy elements, but stuff that we don't want in water. We don't want to drink chromium, aluminum, lead. There's some naturally occurring metals that we usually think of them as pollution, but it actually comes up out of the crust as well in primary water sometimes. But I think that is a good option, and that they should look more into some primary waters for sure, especially where you have it higher up in a mountain. You can drill horizontally into it and then bring it down gradient without having to pump and use a bunch of energy. I think there's a lot of really cool designs you can use for primary water, and you have to go into it, explore, and then do a bunch of geochemistry and see what's in it, because it's not always totally drinkable, but a lot of it is. Let's see here. So where do you want to go next? You want to go
Question
somewhere?
on mega foremost toxins. What are solutions like pulps, macrophage?
Mega foremost toxins. I don't know. I'm interested in what that is. I don't even know. I'm not familiar with mega foremost toxins. I don't claim to know every single thing about water, but I do a lot of work. Most of the work I do is in water. So with the recharge thing, like there's there's like the low impact development type and lead type engineering. So for urban environments, I think it's really great for cities to start requiring new developments to have different elements that peel stormwater off and kind of slowly and passively recharge the natural groundwater systems. I think the more of that happens, like regionally, the more they'll start to see a lot of the aquifers start to bounce back too.
So
But
really, the analogy that comes to mind is like pouring water over a sponge to
yeah,
recharge the
yeah,
aquifer.
sure, yeah, and imagine a sponge that's dried out because you've squeezed it and let it sit out for a while, and it'll soak it up. It's got that pore space that it can hold a lot in it, and but it's really interesting, like you can't bank it all too, so you really have to, like that example I was showing you earlier. Let me share my screen again. Share screen, share. Okay, and let me bring this up again. This one here. There's this basin up in Northern California that it's basically this. Imagine this line right here. This is when we had the model initially crudely cut. This is where it interfaces with the ocean. And so there's the ocean and seawater hitting, and you've got this groundwater basin with all full of fresh water that's up gradient. And so you can't just bank the water there. It's actually at a really steep angle, and the water is always in a flux. It's always fluxing through the system and going to the ocean.
I didn't
And
think
so
about that because of the angle coming down from the mountains.
and then having one of your boundary conditions being the ocean.
Yeah.
Whereas traditionally, the kind you always hear about, you're in the Central Valley, right? And it's this closed system, and you've got all these sub basins, and you can bank water in here for decades and add it in and take out every drop or count the drops that go in, But when you're in some of these coastal basins that flow out to the ocean, even some of these ones here in the Bay Area, it's hard to bank it. You can recharge it, and that's great to recharge, but you can't just expect it all to be there when you want it, because it's moving at a gradient and fluxing towards the ocean, and which just sucks it up and turns it into salt water.
When you go to these cities and you use your meters that gauge, that tell you how much is in there over a given month, will you lose X amount because of that, either gravity or just dissipation, or
Yeah, so we're monitoring groundwater. That's how we actually um that's how we model it, really. That's how we put together our models right now, is we have a bunch of wells and a bunch of monitoring wells, and then I'll put a bunch of transducers in them that I can communicate with in real time and watch them fluctuate around from pumping, annually, decadally, daily, and you can see all the dynamics at once, and model where it's going, and how much is there, and 50 years into the future, which is what we were required to now with the sustainability plan. So we had to put this crazy model using new climatic models plugged into it, coupling it to surface water that are flowing over it, and rain, and then make a water budget of like how it is normally in an equilibrium without humans interacting with it, and then throw all the human stuff on it, and then project that out 50 years. And
so do you, is this like looking at the stock market? Do you ever like pull your face away from the screen? Or I can imagine that would get addictive if, based on the weather, you're like what's going on now?
it's pretty predictable. A lot of it you can see respond to rain. You can see it respond to pumping. And as you get more data over the decades, and a lot of times what I'm doing is we're taking old data that the governments have taken over time, and then we'll grab all that and plug it in and see how those relate to now, and then have the model interpolate it out, like as far as what it looked like back then, because there would be like only a handful of wells, right? Let's say it's 50 or 80 years ago. Well, there's still this data of a water level in it. So what we know of for the rest of the basin, we can then apply to back then. We have all this data now showing us what the water levels are like. And if we just have a handful of points, then we kind of go, oh, well, we know that spot. And when there's water at that level, we can kind of project it out. And when you have a dynamic model, you can then start to kind of go back and forth with it back in time or into the future. It's
Green
not
is
quite
in,
like the stock market.
Green is into like lightning and electrolysis or whatever. Uh, can you recharge water that way? And the image that comes to mind is like young Frankenstein. It's alive. Can you? Yeah, I mean, what's he talking about with lightning and using electricity somehow to purify it, to recharge it?
Uh-huh. Yeah, no, there's so many ways to treat water. I would call that in just like just the sense of a water treatment. Like you can electrocute it, you can put ozone, you can expose it to ozone, ultraviolet. There's all these different things you can do. You can put it through a certain medium of crystals, and it reorients and realigns and reduces the size of the molecular clusters, because water tends to get into these clusters of sevens and nines, and depending on the chemistry. And so, like how much energy do you want to use? How can we set it up so that we can do this passively, or using gravity through? That's why that example I was saying of, well, let's put it in an aquifer and then have it go through 2 miles of a natural filter and pull it out, and then let's see what it looks like and see how good it did. Granular activated carbon, or various forms of it, the different types of carbon, the exotic carbons we're starting to get more information about now. It does a really good job of pulling out contaminants and pollutants and metals, and I use it all the time. It's a big go-to, really, is just pushing
That's
it through.
interesting. My wife's
Mhm.
from Russia, and she buys the activated carbon capsules, and said that that pulls out toxins out of the body. Whether that's a Russian myth. I don't know, but that you mentioned carbon, so
Yeah, no, it's absolutely amazing what carbon does. It it's just it has all these micro pores and space inside it, and has so much surface area per unit volume that you can shove hydrocarbons and metal, like really, really polluted water through a vessel of granular activated carbon, GAC, JC, and out the other side, you're just drinking. It's unbelievable. And it's not as energy intensive, but there's a lot of new technologies that are coming out now. Maurizio sent me a link a few days ago or something, and I was looking at that. And Maurizio Iba on Twitter, for those of you that are friends with him too. And there's this really cool technology where they're making this hydrogel that just is tablets. It's this really, really, in principle, cool thing where you throw, you don't need all this energy and electricity and sun and pumps and all kinds of stuff. You can just throw in a few of these tablets that basically dissolve and make on a molecular level hydrogen peroxide and other types of and also carbon and nanocarbon that cleans it up and cleans the water up. Like if you're in some super rural jungle spot and the water you're trying to drink came from this surface water source that's just lit up with everything, you can take it instead of boiling it and waiting and just all this energy. You could potentially throw some of these tablets in, and it would not only clean it but also get rid of pathogens. So that kind of stuff is pretty cool, and there's a lot of those, and I'm always trying to see where those are going, and
well, David asks if you've ever heard of a super imploder.
Super imploder.
Magnetic vortex water treatment.
Wow, I think that sounds really neat. I'd love to know more about it. I won't claim to know that one.
Okay, somebody's happy. Yes. Very high density magnetics, profoundly optimized charging vortex. Well, that would be good.
Yeah, I mean, water's, it's polar, right? It has well, we can get into all that. That's a whole different thing. But, I think there is a lot of, there's still a lot we don't know about really efficient ways to treat water and clean it up for drinking standards. It's just really like getting a lot of the governments and municipalities and really laws as far as drinking water standards up to speed so that people can start using them. There's like a Title 22, they call it in California, that I have to really I have to adhere to in a lot of my projects, and it has all these standards throughout it, and they're really strict, and they require all this testing and all this stuff. But it's still pretty cumbersome, and there's a lot of I don't think they're updating it enough to pull in a lot of these new technologies that seem to be coming out like every month or every year. There's just like tons and tons of research, and so it's that conversation we had I think a year ago. It's like we just need more R&D money to scale this stuff up for people in municipalities, or to scale it up to manufacture and make systems so that people rurally can have something that doesn't cost them $100,000 or something, and make them go out in debt so horribly. It's.
Are you working on anything south of the border?
Yeah, so this is one here that you and I talked about, I think a year or two ago. This is part of Mexico that has really special water. They have all these mountains, volcanoes, and there's this valley here, and the archaeology is absolutely mind-blowing too. This is probably the oldest example of farming done in the Americas. There's evidence of well over 7,000 years of farming in this Tehuacan Valley. I did a geochemistry study and sort of an aquifer study here in the last year, and saw a lot of the groundwater declining from all the municipal pumping and people's wells pumping down this aquifer, and they've got this river that goes through, but the water has these amazing minerals in it, and it's just like this panel of like really exotic stuff in it, and everyone down there just absolutely praised by it. They'll say, "I need this one spring, there's a spring over here, the spring that comes out of the mountain over here," and it like has it'll have like it'll have like lithium or like nano, gold and silver and different like stuff in it. And there's these old people that are like 105, 110 years old, and it's all they drink. And so we were kind of looking into that a bunch this year and
So
just trying
drinking
to see.
gold and silver and lithium will get you to 100.
That's what some people are claiming here in this valley. But I think this is actually where maize came from. This is where it was the first evidence of it being farmed. And so I got to do a couple of big projects here this year regarding water supply, aquifers, and the chemistry and the dynamics of what's going on with the people. And that's one spot that's south of the border. Another one, let me see, let me get you back this way. Let me get you back that way. South of the border, one right below the border, up in Monterey. It's absolutely crazy what's going on there. There's just unbelievable aquifer there. You wouldn't believe it, right? It's just scorching hot desert, all these plateaus and dry valleys, but they've got all these wells all over that go down like hundreds of feet, and they tag these old channels that are also being overdrafted and picking up all kinds of pollution from like there's all these different like legs that'll come in
What do you
of
mean
the
when you say
aquifer.
they're overdrafted, overused?
Yeah, like they water levels are just bottoming out. They got have some wells up in here, and from 50 years ago where it was 20 feet below the ground, now it's 200 or 300 feet below the ground. You know what I mean? So
Hmm.
they need to start thinking about
Recharging.
managing it, recharging it, getting it back into an equilibrium that's sustainable, because you can't just keep endlessly growing, right? And all of
So,
a
so
sudden you
what you're
collapse.
telling me is Mexico hasn't caught up with this recharging effort that like the American Southwest has?
No, and then also you get these huge corporations that have gone in and bought up the municipal wells, and then now they'll like own exclusive rights to them, and like will bottle it and then put it as like soda water and quote unquote value add it and send it off, and then there's no limits. They don't have a sustainability plan. That's just one example. Another really crazy project that I can't really get into, but I'm gonna do a little bit, and that's the Salton Sea. Let me just zoom back up and out. It's like, how in the world is this whole thing even here? This was naturally just a big lake, right? It would go and
Hmm.
combine with the Colorado River. You come out. Well, the Colorado River doesn't flow to, Baja anymore. It's really sad because this is one of the most amazing wetland estuarine systems in the world right here, and like with the dolphins and whales, and the amount of sea life that will make a journey like halfway around the world to come up to Sea Cortez, to come up here to the abundance of sea life. It's so that's kind of what we're the next kind of project I think to really start thinking about.
Is
Is
to open
how
that back
is
up?
what's going on with the Colorado River? Like, how come they just get to take every last drop and give it to you know, Las Vegas and
Where does
LA?
it stop
And
right now? Basically, where is the Colorado River
yeah, like,
stop?
where
I
is
didn't
it?
know
I
that.
don't look at, do you see it go? I mean, it's nowhere. It's not here. It stops way up here, right? Stops way up here, and it
North of
doesn't really.
LA.
Yeah, and then you know, um, there's what is it, Lake Mead or whatever, that ends up shooting it all over to Las Vegas too. So they dam it all up along the way, then they end up using it all for ag right at the very end, and then now they're thinking about pumping whatever's left, not from ag or from the cities, over into the Salton Sea. So pretty much just hosing. Anyway, so this isn't really a recharge thing, but this is all getting artificially recharged because they're taking. This is like a case of a bad recharge where this river really should flow all the way to you know, Steve Cortez, but it doesn't. They take it, they peel it off, and they put it onto their farms, and then it ends up going down into the aquifers here, and so it's recharging these desert aquifers just from their farming practices instead of going out.
Well,
So,
isn't that a better thing than going out? At least it's recharging somewhere.
yeah, I mean, it's not taken into account, that there
You
was this
lost that whole area
massive
there.
ecosystem that really depended on that surface water to come all the way
That
out. So
ecosystem right there, is that dying now because there's no Colorado
yeah,
coming
yeah,
in?
it's dead.
Ah,
It's pretty much dead. There's still a lot all the way up. This is, you know, really, really amazing all the way in here. But as far as the invertebrates and clams and bivalves that cleaned the water and made this really clean fresh water at the very end, it used to come out, and then it was like this, this big rearing zone for a lot of sea mammals and fish and stuff. So, but I digress. What else? What else did you want to talk about, or any questions
well,
regarding
let's
specifically
see what
recharge or otherwise?
folks. If you got any questions for Rye, let's
'Cause
go ahead.
I can
Uh,
talk all day
what
about stuff.
what can individuals do to improve water quality? Do you have a recommendation? Like, do you use a particular filter at home? Do you trust tap water? What does your household do?
Yeah, I'm out rurally. I'm on the Sonoma coast. I'm a couple hours north of San Francisco, or it's really rural and remote. So I'm just on. I have a combination of spring water and groundwater, and I have a really low use. And I also have swales on my property to capture a lot of the storm water running off my
Mhm.
property, so that at least I clean up anything from our driveway and roads and house uses. It initially kind of impounds it before it goes right to the creeks when it's the rainy season. That way we're not putting turbid water into the creek, or if there's some oil or some drops of something from any of our uses, God forbid, at least it's not slamming right into the creeks. And so that's, for that particular thing, that's one thing you can do. As far as my water source, there's a lot of different things you can do. I'm just blessed with really good spring water that I don't have to treat at all. I put my head in it and drink it.
Wow.
But if you don't have that, um, there's a lot of really cool natural ways to clean up your water by making sort of a layered gravity-fed filtration system, where you start off with some coarse sand and then gradually make some finer layers. Have it go to finer layers of sand through a vessel, and
Mhm.
eventually have like really fine sand, like silty layer at the very bottom. Not the very bottom, underlying that coarser sand up top. So at least you're filtering out the big stuff. Then you can have it go through your own. You can even home make your own type of granular carbon. You can slow make carbon yourself from your fireplace or from different types of furnaces with wood, and put the bottom with a bunch of carbon, like blocks and ground up carbon. You can make a big old layer of that, and have the very last part of your vessel filter go through that. And once you've set it up, it doesn't have to be to any like super strict conditions. You can actually crudely make it and kind of overbuild it a little bit. But you then flush it out until it comes out clear. And then you can literally just, do that even from like muddy water. You can like highly turbid, muddy water, if you have enough of of each of the layers in a tank or a vessel, you can just drink crystal clear
Mm.
purified water out the end that way. And I've seen people do it. You can YouTube people with these really amazing um, ways to do home filters that way.
You had some videos when I talked to you just a few minutes before we went on. Do you got
Sure,
anything you want to share?
sure. We can look at okay, here's a sonic drill rig. So this is I'm actually was the really cool thing about this. I'm going to cue it up first. So sonic drilling is you take a solid core, and you basically, by using sonic waves, you can vibrate it so that it just sinks into the ground. It gives you solid cores you can pull out to see what is in the ground and what the aquifer is made of. And so this particular example, I'm laying out cores from a sonic drill rig, and I'm trying to get this municipality off of an aquifer that's connected to the river. All their wells are only 100 feet deep, and gravel and sand. And if they pump and pump and pump, well, it's going to affect a river and fish right nearby. So I had a hunch. Being a geologist, I actually knew. I was looking at cross sections and some old wells and some other stuff. I think there's some deeper aquifers we can do to manage this, especially maybe in the dry season when the fish need the water the most. We can use wells that come from deeper aquifers and don't touch that shallow stuff, so that we can keep those shallow groundwater elevations high and the river from drying up, and during the droughts. And so this is one of these going. Let me click on this and see what this does. It's got awful loud. There's the casing right there. I've got another one on.
Oh, I like your office outside.
It's okay.
Are you pretty good at like reading these things? Can you just like look at them and know what you got right away?
Yeah. Here, let me see. You
I
guys still see
figured
my
a
screen?
hydrogeologist should know that stuff.
Yeah. Ask your question again on my end. It came in so loud, that video. What was your question again?
If the cores that come up, if
Oh,
you're
yeah.
able to just like look at them and know, or do you
Yeah.
got to send them
Yep.
away for analysis
No.
to get it?
No, it's a good question. I can look at it and know at this point, but when I'm designing the perforation size openings for the screens in the casing on a well, sometimes I'll send them out for a sieve analysis just to make sure I see how much silt would be passing through a certain size when I'm doing really the hydraulics and the calculation to see how much a certain size casing could
Mm-hmm.
bring in or inject back into the ground. And so you can know what it is, but then you got to do the sanity check sometimes before you put a $1 million asset into the ground that doesn't work, right? Here's another type of method. This is an air hammer casing, or rotary casing drill rig that is also got awful loud, but is also being used for the same purpose also more recently. So listen, here's this. This is that was a restoration site where they've already done a bunch of creek and slough. There's that word again, restoration, and I'm trying to get this municipality off pulling from the river and the slough, and so we're trying to get them aquifer storage and recovery capabilities instead of just pulling from surface waters, which you have to treat and also take away from the fish. And in the north, in Northern California, fish are a big deal because the salmonids still run.
Mm-hmm.
They're still running. And so right now we're just trying to find a way not to lose them, and they're disappearing. And so there's a lot of projects going on that have to do with that.
So when you're out there, Green's asking if you're looking for minerals.
What's the question regarding
Says,
minerals?
"Are you looking for minerals?" Question mark.
No, we're not exploring for gold or silver or anything like that. I will after I build the well, whether it's for aquifer storage and recovery or just for like domestic or municipal extraction. We would do a hydraulics pump test, see what it can do as how hard you can pump it or not, and what happens to the water levels around you. But once you've done all that and gotten it developed and online, then I would do like a really expensive like a Title 22 and a minerals test to see what all is in it and how I'm going to have to treat it later, or how we're going to have to
So the
treat it.
government interested in seeing your minerals reports so that they know more of what it is they're living on or by?
Yeah, you have to actually report it. You have to report exactly what's a lot of work around Shasta Lake right now. A lot of these communities, you do have to report, what is in it. You have to do monthly if it's a municipal water source, you have to have, sometimes daily, weekly, or monthly tests done, for bacteria and different pathogens, and then also, the mineralogy, because like, where you have a lot of volcanics, like here, for instance, where I'm showing, Lake Shasta, and you have a volcano right nearby in Mount Shasta and Lassen, and these kinds of things. If you have a well somewhere around here, and you can imagine there's lots of them, you can see there's a lot of ag around it, and you see, logging, but all kinds of weird stuff comes up in the northwest, where I do a lot of my work right now and lived and grew up. There's a lot of arsenic that comes out of the soils from the ashes from the volcanics. Blew all these ashes, and they turned into these clay layers that ended up, in the aquifers. And so sometimes I'll do zone pump testing, and I'll pump different zones and test each one individually to see what the chemistry is. So maybe I can block one out that's bleeding out a bunch of arsenic and chromium.
So are you telling me that when St. Helens blew all that ash, eventually there's arsenic in there?
Depends. Each volcano has a unique fingerprint of
Okay.
chemistry, but the Sonoma volcanic specifically, which stopped, oh, okay, here's another really good injection, and I'll talk about this project.
I
The
missed
Sonoma.
St. Helens by 1 year going up there.
So, you really have, you got the inland mountains, the big ones, which is the Sierra Nevadas, but then you have the coastal mountains all the way through California, and in the north, the coastal mountains, there's the Mayacamas, and they are smaller, but they're still really steep and rugged. But they are from, like, here's the Lake County volcanic highlands, but the Santa Rosa Valley, Healdsburg, and there's all these little valleys that are formed, and there's these mountains that go north-south as well. And these were these are dormant volcanoes too that got cut off, just only a few million years ago. So they still have a lot of heat, and that's why there's the largest geothermal electricity power plant in the world is right up here, up in the mountains here. And I do
Oh,
a bunch
interesting.
of
I
work up
didn't know that.
there. It's the Geyserville, right? So it's the geysers, and so it's crazy what they've done up there. You just can't even believe it. There's all these crazy pipelines and power plants. Like each one of these buildings is like basically a power plant. Where we've drilled a circular loop of a well that goes down into the volcano and does a loop and comes back up, and you can put really any kind of water down into it, and by the time it goes down and loops back into the mountain and comes back up, it's steaming hot, and so you just put that through a turbine and get electricity. So that's where we
Wow.
actually get all of our electricity. We don't have a coal burning or a nuclear power plant or anything else. Like everyone around here, most of the grid there's this microgrid pretty much tied into the geysers.
Wow, that is
Mhm.
fascinating because you think, especially, the Ring of Fire all the way around there with all the volcanoes. I mean, I didn't know
There's
about
so
that.
much
I mean,
opportunity
I
for that.
lived out west and I didn't know about that.
Yeah, so that's kind of the shining example right now. I do a lot of work up there, mainly trying to figure out different ways to get water to there to use. There's different
Yeah.
tertiary treated water that we get over to it. There's some overland stormwater flows, and so I worked on a lot of the like injection wells and intakes, and then the sort of chemistries between the different water going into those geothermal injection wells. And you'll see them pop off. Sometimes I'll just go in the morning to work I'll drive east from I live out on the coast, out here, and I'll drive inland to go to an office to work, maybe in Santa Rosa or something, and I could see them, just all these geysers steaming off, and like everyone's power over here is coming from that.
Yeah,
There's a lot
David.
of opportunity for that. Right.
David brings up the water rights issue, and I don't want to go into that now, other than you say that people have lost their lives over water rights fights out west. So it's
That's a big
serious.
one right now. It's really serious. There's been a lot of that. I will second that. From just Wild West kind of style, just I'm going over with my gun and shooting you. I mean, just really crazy. You're just like, what? And so that's one thing I'm actually working on, is community consolidation of water, because these little coastal communities, see all these, there's the Sonoma and Mendocino coast. It's super remote. I mean, it takes hours to get out here, and it is absolutely spectacular.
Yep.
But it's really scarce on water, and you would think they would have lots of water. Everything green you see are redwoods. It's just redwood jungle. But like, it all just flows off. Either the redwoods drink it and make it too. With the fog, they'll actually make it. But there's no storage in the rocks here. It's this really hard rocks that don't infiltrate. They're just like this rock hard,
You're
material that.
taking me back now when you traveled down that road and saw like thousands of bumper stickers, trees of mystery. And and I and I didn't stop for trees of mystery. And to this day, I rue the day that I didn't stop.
So this is one of my favorite projects. This is one of the most spectacular and beautiful little towns. Like, I mean, it just blows me away every time I come up to it. And I grew up just south of it, but a little town called Mendocino. But you'd think there's a lot of water, right? They have all these rivers constantly. I mean, it's
Yeah.
just redwood jungle going off into the east, and parklands, but it's solid rock underneath everything. So the rainwater and the rivers just flow over. And so people have wells and stuff, but when you don't get rain for 3 years in a row, it gets scary. Basically, my phone was ringing off nonstop, and I did a big project for this school where we're trying to get them off of using their well water to water fields and stuff, and making tanks for storage, more storage, reusing treated water for different types of irrigation and such, and then consolidating into a bigger system that we can manage, so we can get everybody water, instead of everyone has their own little well, and this guy's well goes dry and this guy doesn't, but this guy blames him, and they end up shooting each other. And there's a lot of that. I mean, I couldn't even believe it. So this was a fun one, because we got a grant from the government to pull this off for the school and the town, and it's ongoing, but we're going to be consolidating pretty much like a lot of the water systems to give everybody water.
No more
So
questions, but what do you got going on in the near future and probably over the winter? What are you going to be doing?
I'm wrapping up a groundwater sustainability plan for the state of California of a major basin, and I'll link you to it. And at that point, I'll probably just be like, "Hey, this is me," and I'll probably, when we start doing our talks, I'll just put my face on and be more open. But that's what I'm losing sleep over right now. It's 1,000 pages of tech memos and a model that we've had to put together, and really, really aggressive, like, stakeholders of all different types. Old ranchers to people who are biologists and are saying that the pumpers from the irrigation are killing the fish, and so we're thrown into all that to try and give everyone answers. And it doesn't matter what you come up with, there's going to be people really pissed, because they think what they see is what's happening, and the reality is what everyone is seeing, I'm just going to say this, is not what's actually happening. Just because you drive by and you see a river that looks dry, and then you see some farms off a mile away irrigating, it doesn't mean that that's why the river's dry. I'll just leave it at that. So
Yeah.
I'm mostly working on that. I'm working on wrapping up a groundwater model and a sustainability plan for the state of California, and a basin, and it's a big deal.
Well,
So
success to you, and
thank you so much.
I wish you the best in that, and we'll be in touch. And We'll talk more, and I want to thank you for being the guest on Fringe and being
Hey,
here and talking to folks.
hey, thank you so much for inviting me. I always love talking to you, Rico, online and offline. Reach out anytime, and yeah, doing something quarterly or biennially or whenever to get caught up on certain subjects or otherwise. Let me know. I'm down.
All right. Thanks, Ry. Take
Take good
care.
care. You too.
Bye.
Bye.
Okay, you can follow Ry on Twitter at Ry, which is RYRYTAL. So he's our resident guest, and I want to thank everybody who came. Let me see if there's any concluding comments before we leave. Big project, yeah, that is a big project. You know, Ry is the real deal, hydrogeologist extraordinaire. So with that, I want to thank everyone for joining this version of Beyond the Fringe. I had taken a couple months off to write another book and going to release it at the start of next year. So I'll be around, and with that, be seeing you.
It's beautiful. It's fun. There's no fear there.